Good morning. It is Tuesday, November the 20th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. And this is the show that is not for the PhDs or the master's degrees people, but for the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. It's for the people that like to listen to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, but decide that there's got to be more and that they can do better. So I was the Caravan. There's news about the caravan of people that is on their way to the United States and that are in Mexico, and a large number of them happen to be in Tijuana right now, and that the Mexican people started protesting these people, telling them to get out, to go home, complaining that these people were ungrateful and creating problems. So. And they want them out. And they showed up in their with their waving their Mexican flags, and so it was a pretty delicious irony. But also the Mexican government apparently, as of this morning, anyhow, has filed some kind of a human rights complaint against the United States. I guess they're upset because they're in the middle here, caught in the middle of this situation, and they figure that if the United States would just simply let the refugees in, then or these immigrants in, then everything would be okay. So, which is funny because again, the Mexicans don't want them. So why would you think that we would want a whole bunch of people that are apparently spending their time getting drunk, getting high, and just generally creating a nuisance of themselves? So the tactics of the Caravan are psychologistic in nature. The whole point of this is to manipulate, bully, and intimidate, and to use that psychology and psychologistic to force their way across the border, to exercise power, and to do so not because anybody that is organizing this gives a damn about the people in the Caravan actually getting jobs or getting refugee status or getting a place to live and living the American dream, but because they intend to agitate and they want to create social friction to the point that there is created a revolutionary potential. And they do this the way we saw it was done when they approached the Mexican border. One of the first things that they did, the organizers made sure that all the women and children were moved to the front of this caravan. All the men moved to the back, especially the troublemakers, because the troublemakers then basically hid behind women and children and threw rocks at the federales, at the federal police. That's why you see pictures of the federal police with bloodied faces, because they got hit by rocks and whatnot. So then it's basically like having a chip on your shoulder. Chip on your shoulder is when some guy starts to get into a confrontation with somebody, another guy usually, and what he'll do is put a chip of wood on his shoulder and say, "I dare you to knock it off." And that the implication is that if you knock the chip off of his shoulder, there's going to be a fight. Okay, and that's the same thing that's going on here, where the Caravan peoples will be provocative. They throw rocks and other things at the police department, daring them to start shooting, knowing that there are women and children up front, and that if the police department starts shooting, then it is the women and children that will end up getting killed, and that again, creating more revolutionary potential. Then they can make a big deal out of that. Look, the world is corrupt. We're just peaceful people trying to migrate from place to place, and these evil, wicked capitalists are keeping us from doing it, and using violence to boot. So that's one of the things that people in the United States need to be aware of, that when we've already got some that are on the border, and now, and the more are coming to the borders to be let into the United States. And we have to remember that they're probably going to use the same tactics with us. They may very well put, again, all women and children up front, have the troublemakers go to the back, start throwing rocks at the ICE agents and any military people that happen to be within range as well. Again, daring the military, daring the ICE agents to start shooting and putting the women and children in harm's way. This is a tactic that's used by the Palestinians. The Hamas does this all the time, firing rockets at Israel, but they do it from the safety of a hospital or a mosque. And so the same kind of tactic is going on here. And so the government and conservatives in general have to be aware of that that's going to be the case. This is the way they're going to play the game to try to, again, agitate for, in the hopes of trying to create revolutionary potential. So one of the ways you can do it, as I've suggested before, is what they're doing pretty much now. They're saying we can only process 100 people a day. Process the people, act in good faith, have these people come across the border, but you can slow roll them. Time is on our side. Time is not on their side. They're here from Honduras. They've got nowhere to live. They've got no jobs. They've got nothing. So if you make the process very deliberate, and again, you take your time with it and make sure that you do these individuals on a case-by-case basis, you may find that the vast majority of the caravan are simply going to turn around and go home or go somewhere else or just stay in Mexico. And the problem ends up solving itself without having to create more friction, more social friction. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from, today I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's Lexicon and also from Breaking Bad, the philosophy in Breaking Bad, Badder Living Through Chemicals, and also House, Philosophy in House, and Everybody Lies. So when I come back. And thank you very much. Ayn Rand Lexicon, a book full of excellent concepts, basically, and the concepts that are important to Ayn Rand and the books that she has written. So today's offering is cooperation. Cooperation is the free association of men who work together by voluntary agreement, each deriving from its own personal benefit. A proper association is united by ideas, not by men, and its members are loyal to the ideas, not to the group. It is eminently reasonable that men should seek to associate with those who share their convictions and values. It is impossible to deal or even to communicate with men whose ideas are fundamentally opposed to one's own, and one should be free not to deal with them. All proper associations are formed or joined by individual choice and on conscious intellectual grounds, philosophical, political, professional, etc., not by the psychological or geographical accident of birth, and not on the ground of tradition. When men are united by ideas, i.e. by explicit principles, there is no room for favors, whims, or arbitrary power. The principles serve as an objective criterion for determining actions and for judging men, whether leaders or members. This requires a high degree of conceptual development and independence, but this is the only way men can work together justly, benevolently, and safely. The principle of individual rights is the only moral base of all groups or associations. Any group that does not recognize this principle is not an association, but a gang or a mob. So that last part is an interesting statement in regards to what has gone on recently with the people that are running around primarily in Washington D.C., but trying to chase various politicians, usually Republicans, and some that are not Republicans, out of restaurants. That every time they appear in public, that they're harassed, and people have described these groups as a mob. And so she provides the definition, because then, of course, the left says, no, it's not a mob. Well, if this is a group of people that have no respect for individual rights, then again, they're not an association, but a mob. So, interesting definition there. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Philosophy and House, Everybody Lies. Thank you very much. Philosophy and House. And where we were at was dealing with issues of informed consent, regret, and remorse. And this section of the chapter is called The Problem of Purity. Of course, it could be that moral luck is a problem only if we expect moral responsibility to be simple, a matter of black and white. If what we are aiming for is moral purity, in other words, clear-cut judgments about who is guilty and who is innocent, or clear-cut demarcations about what we are and are not responsible for, then moral luck muddies the water. If purity is not important to us, though, then moral luck might simply be a reminder that life isn't simple. According to Walker, it makes more sense to make moral assessments of persons in terms of their actions rather than considering the actions themselves in isolation. When we consider the context of the whole person, much that appears tricky about moral luck seems to abate. It makes a difference to us, and it seems that it should make a difference, whether a speeding driver who causes an injury is speeding in order to tend to a family emergency, or whether the driver is drunk and speeding for fun. Finding out that Chase is distracted in, quote, the mistake, unquote, because of his father's death, rather than being hungover or lazy, helps us to refrain from judging him as callous and negligent. The whole episode is set up to play with the difference in our responses to Chase's mistake. Most of the episode, we think that he was in fact being lazy or careless. We find out only at the end that it was his father's death that distracted him, and our reaction to this discovery highlights the factors we instinctively use in praising and blaming. After all, quote, the agent is not a self-sufficient rational will fully expressed in each episode of choice, but is a history of choices and, witting or unwitting, concessions for which episodes are meaningful in terms of much larger stretches, ongoing themes, constitutive or passing projects up to and including an entire life. We know the nature of Chase's relationship with his father. Chase's distraction doesn't mean he isn't responsible for his patient's death, but it does help make us to make a concession for him in this case. Further, we cannot simply choose what we are going to take responsibility for and what we are not. Just as we expect the faultless driver to feel some sort of regret for killing a child, Walker suggests that, quote, responsibilities outrun control, unquote. The larger context of our lives requires us to take responsibility for many events and outcomes that we would not have chosen. This is part of what it is to be human, and the reason that we praise those whose grace and integrity allow them to deal with events and outcomes well. If this is true, then moral luck does not undermine human moral agency, but rather offers it more opportunities in which to practice different virtues. Clearly, House would be the wrong show from which to expect too much moral purity. A consideration of the problems involved in moral luck shows us that maybe we shouldn't even try. Rather than thinking that moral responsibility means having control over all of our actions and their consequences, we should recognize the large degree to which our actions and consequences are beyond our control. House teaches us that in the midst of this uncertainty, we must have the confidence to act when not to act is almost certainly fatal. We must do the best we can and be realistically prepared to accept and take responsibility for dire consequences. So this whole section is fascinating, because what he's really doing here is conflating ethics and justice. They're two separate issues. And I've always used the example of two people rob a bakery or burglarize. Let's say they burglarize a bakery. One guy burglarizes the bakery because he wants to feed his family. The other guy burglarizes the bakery because he's trying to profit. He's going to sell the loaves so he can make money. So the ethical issue is clear for both of them. They're both guilty. They should be scorned, and they should be subjected to all the normal things that bad people do. They're bad people, both of them, for doing it. Now, the question then in terms of justice is, how should they be punished? Should each person be punished in the same way or to the same degree? Should they both go to prison for a year? No. And that's part of justice, is that's where you consider their motives. Okay, motives are considered when you're just trying to dispense justice. The initial issue is guilt or innocence. Did they burglarize the bakery? Yes or no? Yes, they did. Boom. That's the end of that. Okay, part. Now, the rest of it is a matter of justice. Okay, the one guy that's doing it to feed his family, we're going to go ahead and give him perhaps probation for burglarizing the bakery, whereas the person that's doing it for profit, that's going to sell so he can make more money to do whatever with, he is going to end up going to jail. So, now in this particular example, let's see about let me get on with this. The point of what they're trying to, the reason that this has been done where they're conflating the two is determinism. The whole idea is to absolve the individual of responsibility and suggest to people that we have no free will. They make things so complicated so that, because if you have free will, then you have to be able to make decisions. What am I going to do? What am I not going to do? In order to make the decisions, they have to be some pretty clear-cut differences or choices involved. I can do this or I can do that. What they're suggesting is that everything is muddy, that it's not just about making a decision, but your history of decisions. And when you're getting involved in the word history, you're getting involved in determinism. So people have the free will, they have clear choices, but the left doesn't want to acknowledge that. Okay, because determinism, if you get everybody to agree that they have no free will, I'm a victim. I'm in the position I'm in because I'm simply a victim of circumstances and powers beyond my control, then there's an excuse for what? Government. Okay, who's the biggest badass on the block is the government, particularly the federal government. Okay, so like with big tobacco, it's another example I like to use. With determinism, they say, well, nobody smokes because they choose to, because you're exercising free will. They're doing it because they're under this spell of advertisements and other inducements by big tobacco. These big, huge, rich tobacco companies are forcing people to smoke. So what we need is for the government to come along and act as a counterforce. The federal government will come in and act as a counterforce. We will shut down tobacco advertising and do other things to force people either to quit smoking if you've already started, or force people to not pick it up to begin with, to not start smoking to begin with. But the whole idea is it's nothing but force, according to them. And that's why he's conflating all of these ethics with justice. Here, according to Walker, it makes more sense to make moral assessments of persons in terms of their actions rather than considering the actions themselves in isolation. No, it doesn't make more sense unless what you're doing is, again, a justice issue. What do they deserve in terms of punishment? Then it makes sense. But in terms of just making the moral assessment, did they do right or wrong? No. You ask yourself, what did they do? Did they rob? Did they burglarize? Did they break the law? Then they're wrong, period. Immoral, unethical, and they have the opportunity to redeem themselves by making amends. Try to make the other person whole again. Let's see. When we consider that the context of the whole person, much that appears tricky about moral luck, and there really is no moral luck. There's no such thing. This is the entrance, the door, the camel getting its nose under the tent. the way they get into all of this is with this fiction called moral luck, when there is no such thing. It makes a difference to us, and it seems that it should make a difference whether a speeding driver who causes an injury is speeding in order to tend to family emergency or whether the driver is drunk and speeding for fun. And it does in terms of justice. But in terms of whether or not he's right or wrong, speeding is wrong, period. Now, if if he is speeding and he causes an injury and he wasn't doing it, he's doing it because he's trying to get home or whatever because of a family emergency, then you're going to expect leniency. Those are what would be referred to as mitigating circumstances. And when if he's drunk and doing it for fun, those are not mitigating circumstances, and so you would expect that the justice system would be harder on the person that's drunk rather than the person who's attending to a family emergency. But either way, that's an issue of justice. Okay, so all of this stuff also about free will or lack of free will is the basis for which the left tells everybody else, particularly the right, not to judge. Don't judge. You see bumper stickers and you see things on Facebook all the time where you never know what a person is dealing with. It doesn't matter. Okay, you rob me, I don't care what you're dealing with. What you're doing is wrong. You burglarize, you rape, you go after little children, you're wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I don't care what you're dealing with. I don't care what your psychological problems are, your financial problems. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Okay, in terms of strictly right and wrong and condemning the behavior. So that's one of the areas where you have to be, you have to maintain stand your ground. Okay, and you got to listen carefully to what your lefties in your life are saying, because if you listen carefully, you'll hear it. You'll hear that, they're conflating the ethics with justice. And then your job is simply to separate the two. Just tell the person, excuse me. But actually, as far as whether or not the behavior is right or wrong, it doesn't matter who they are. We don't need to consider the whole person. We just consider their behavior. But when it comes to justice, then we'll consider who they are and why they did what they did. So, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Breaking Bad, Philosophy in Breaking Bad, Bad or Living Through Chemistry. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Bad or Living Through Chemistry via Breaking Bad. And the whole thing of Breaking Bad was, again, the whole theme of it was that it's an ugly universe. The whole universe sucks. That the only way to succeed is to get lucky, cheat, or combination of the two. So that's one of the premises of it. The other thing that goes through, the theme that goes through the show is might makes right, and the ends justify the means. That all it matters is basically getting what you want. And who you hurt in the process really doesn't matter. And they're not covering that aspect of this in the book so far. Hopefully later on in this book they will deal with that issue, but so far not so. This section of the chapter is called Requiem for Crazy 8. His heart was racing, his thoughts were racing. Quote, he knows my name, he knows everything about me, unquote. The pot he smoked slowed down his heart, but nothing could keep Walt's head from spinning. Pacing didn't help either. Wandering back and forth between a strange kitchen and a strange living room burned up the hours, but it didn't make the problem go away. Crazy 8 was still chained by the neck to the beam in the basement, and, according to the sacred coin toss, it was Walt's job to, quote, take care of him, unquote. The situation was all the more troubling when the boy coughed. From time to time, Crazy 8 would let out a wheezing cough. It sounded so much like Walt's own that it brought tears to his eyes. Sympathy is a bitch. Walt knew that sympathy could only make this already complicated situation all the more complicated. At least from where he sits now, on the throne in the upstairs bathroom, Walt can't hear the coughing, the wheezing, or any of Crazy 8's barely vital signs. In this little sanctuary with his little bit of peace, Walt decides to approach the problem rationally. And so he creates a list of reasons to let him live and reasons or a reason to kill him. Reason to let him live, it's the moral thing to do, Judeo-Christian principles, you're not a murderer, he may listen to reason, post-traumatic stress, you won't be able to live with yourself, and murder is wrong. Kill him, he'll kill your entire family if you let him go. So on the one hand, acting morally, do what is moral, do what is right, and let the chips fall where they may, or on the other hand, might makes right and the ends justify the means. Walt's deliberations amount to this. In favor of letting Crazy 8 live, Walt offers 3 claims grounded in commonly held moral principles. 1 inculcation of 2 of the world's most widespread religions, 1 fervent claim concerning his own identity, and 3 very practical considerations. Still, when considered in light of Walt's 1 very compelling reason to kill Crazy 8, the rational path is far from clear. What's clear is Walt's struggle to be a good person while doing bad things. Here, too, Walt's life and sentiments parallel those of Augustine. Contrary to what you might expect from what I told you about Augustine's Confessions, it's not a story in which Augustine, the lascivious protagonist, has a great epiphany and suddenly goes straight. Quite the contrary. According to his own confession, Augustine desired from an early age to be a moral person, to understand the origins of evil, while, at the same time, indulging in excess. What changes and matures over the course of Augustine's life are his arguments and beliefs with respect to these issues and the questions that these concerns raise. Augustine expresses with frank honesty the pleasure he took in the fulfillment of his carnal desires. Despite his mother's warning not to have sex outside of marriage, Augustine admits that he had lots of sex. Even after Augustine broke up with his girlfriend and baby mama in anticipation of marrying a woman of his mother's choosing, Augustine confesses, quote, "Because I was more a slave of lust than a true lover of marriage, I took another mistress," unquote. Book 6, Chapter 15. In all this, Augustine is saying the same thing. He wanted to be badass. He enjoyed being badass, and you can't be badass without being bad. All the while, and despite his great indulgences, Augustine asked God for redemption. But what he wanted was a redemption of a particular kind. Redemption without sacrificing the fun, the debauchery, and the gratification of the bodily desires he was enjoying at the time. He wanted redemption, but not yet. This is precisely what Walt wants, a clean conscience without sacrificing the adrenaline rush, the freedom, and the fat stacks that he believes will secure his family's future. Walt, too, wants redemption, but not yet. Walt's desire for redemption as he continues to break bad is epitomized when, after making a deal with Tuco and witnessing the man beat his associate to death, Walt says to Jesse, quote, 737,000, that is what I need, 11 more drug deals, and always in a public place from now on. It's doable, definitely doable, unquote. Season 2, 737. Despite all he's seen, Walt still believes that a no rough stuff type deal is possible. This, of course, isn't what a man of reason anticipates. It's not what Walt anticipates either. It's what Walt wants, and he wants it because it's the only way to remain a good person while doing bad things. Before this plan is played out, however, Walt will kill Crazy 8, blow up a car, blow up a building, and adopt the name Heisenberg. So, one of the things that it crossed my mind about all this is, let's see here, the no rough stuff type of deal. Oh, is the idea that he got into this whole thing impulsively. Okay, he got into drugs impulsively. This was not something, and throughout the show you recognize that because he goes from one crisis to another crisis to another crisis. And that's always evidence of impulsive behavior. Okay, impulsive behavior leads to more impulsive behavior because you end up coming up with surprises all the time. You decide, I'm going to become a drug dealer, and then all of a sudden you're confronted with problems you hadn't anticipated. For instance, rival drug dealers. That's what Crazy 8 basically was a rival drug dealer who was now going to, wanted to take over Walt's drug business. And that's how they ended up killing the one guy, killing both of them, basically. But he ends up, again, he didn't stop and think about this. Okay, let's see, if I decide that I want to sell drugs in order to make money to pay for chemotherapy, I'm going to have rivals. What am I going to do about my rivals? He doesn't think about that. He just gets into it. Hey, I see money here. This is going to solve my problems. I'll get in, I'll get out. I'll get in, pay my chemotherapy bills, etc., and then I'll go ahead and get out and go on with my life. And then, of course, he's surprised when he ends up with new problems that he hadn't anticipated. And since these are problems that he hadn't anticipated, he now has to do what? He has to continue to act impulsively. What do I do about Crazy 8? He's pacing the floor back and forth and back and forth. It's too late to he's going to have to just basically pull something out of his rear end. Pull an answer out of his rear end. And he eventually kills him. And the same thing with the guys that when they came to his RV where he was cooking all the meth, and again, they captured him, put him and Jesse at gunpoint, took them out to where the meth was being cooked so they could look at this operation, and they're having to do what? He's having to come up with a plan on the fly, act impulsive. And every time he acts impulsive, he creates new consequences he hadn't anticipated, which means that he has to act impulsively again and again and again and again. And your whole life is spinning out of control. And you end up with exactly the opposite of what you had anticipated. In this particular case, he thinks he's going to be able to put his life under control by acting impulsively, and instead it just makes things worse. And acting impulsively is one of the worst things that you can do for yourself psychologically and in terms of pursuing happiness, because it seems to create the exact opposite of whatever is intended. If you're acting impulsively to create excitement, you end up again creating more excitement that you had anticipated, and actually it gets you depressed, because again your life ends up spinning out of control. You have no control over your life. It's depressing. What is your answer to being depressed? To act impulsively. So it's just a negative cycle that feeds on itself. So at this point, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.